The roar silenced the entire dining room of the Obsidian, New York's most exclusive restaurant. A crystal wine glass shattered against the wall. That was the sound of the third waitress being fired in 20 minutes. The man at the corner table, a billionaire tycoon with a reputation for destroying companies, was untouchable. Everyone was terrified of him. Everyone, except for the girl in the back, wiping silverware. Helen, they thought she was just a mute nobody. They didn't know she was the only one who understood exactly what the tycoon was saying, and that she was the missing heiress he had been hunting for 10 years. The air inside the Obsidian was usually thick with the scent of truffle oil and the quiet murmur of million-dollar deals. Tonight, however, the air smelled like fear. Derek, the floor manager, was sweating through his pristine Italian suit. He paced back and forth near the kitchen pass, running a hand through his gelled hair. His face was a mask of pure panic. "I need a server. Now," Derek hissed at the huddled group of waitstaff. "Someone who won't faint. Someone who won't drop a fork. Who is left?" "There's no one, Derek," whispered Chloe, the head waitress. She was usually the queen bee of the floor, a stunning blonde who made $2,000 a night in tips just by batting her eyelashes at Wall Street bankers. But right now, she was hiding behind the espresso machine, her face pale. He fired Jessica. He made Tom cry. And he just threw a bottle of Pellegrino at Sophie because she poured it from the wrong angle. The man is a monster. They were talking about the guest at table 1, Magnus Sterling. Even the name sounded expensive. He was a foreign titan of industry, a man whose net worth fluctuated by the billions depending on his mood. He had arrived unannounced, with an entourage of 4 grim-faced bodyguards and a personal assistant who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Magnus was rumored to be in New York to acquire the crumbling Harrington logistics empire, a hostile takeover that would put thousands out of work. But right now, his only business was terrorizing the staff of the Obsidian. "He's speaking. I don't even know what he's speaking," Chloe said, her voice trembling. "It sounds like German, but angry. Then he switches to French, but it's too fast. If I go back out there, I'm going to have a panic attack." Derek cursed under his breath. He looked around the kitchen, his eyes landing on the dish pit. In the back, obscured by steam and the clatter of porcelain, was Helen. Helen usually didn't exist to people like Derek and Chloe. She was the shadow runner. She polished glasses, folded napkins, and carried heavy trays of dirty dishes. She wore the generic uniform, black trousers, a slightly oversized white shirt, and a black apron that had seen better days. Her brown hair was pulled back in a severe, messy bun, and she wore thick-rimmed glasses that hid half her face. She kept her head down. She never spoke unless spoken to, and even then, it was usually just a quiet, "Yes, sir." Most of the staff assumed she was uneducated, perhaps a girl from the Midwest who had washed out of college and was just trying to pay rent on a basement apartment in Queens. They called her Mouse. "You," Derek barked, pointing a manicured finger at her. Helen froze, a polishing cloth inside a champagne flute. She looked up, her green eyes wide behind the lenses. "Me, sir." "Yes, you. Mouse. Put down the glass," Derek snapped, marching over and grabbing her arm. "You're going to table 1. "But I'm not a server," Helen stammered, her voice low and raspy. "I don't know the menu codes. I'm not allowed on the floor during service. You said my shoes were too ugly for the dining room." "I don't care about your shoes right now," Derek shouted, his voice cracking. "I need a warm body to drop the water refill and take the appetizer order. Just go out there, smile, nod, and if he screams, just take it. Do not speak. Do not look him in the eye. Just survive for 5 minutes until I can call the owner." Chloe let out a cruel, relieved laugh. "Oh, this is going to be good. The mouse versus the lion. Should we call an ambulance now?" Helen pulled her arm back from Derek's grip, A flash of something cold and hard passed through her eyes, a look that didn't belong to a dishwasher. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the submissive fear they expected. I really shouldn't, Helen said, looking toward the swinging double doors. Mr. Sterling is particular. Derek froze. How do you know his name is Sterling? We didn't put it in the reservation system. Helen looked down at her shoes. I saw it on the news, in the break room newspaper. Whatever. Derek shoved a silver pitcher of water into her hands. It was heavy, condensation slicking the sides. Go now. If you walk out, you're fired, and I'll make sure you don't get a job scrubbing toilets in this city again. The threat hung in the air. Helen looked at the pitcher, then at the doors. She took a deep breath. Fine, she whispered. She pushed through the double doors and stepped onto the floor of the obsidian. The atmosphere changed instantly. The ambient jazz music seemed too loud in the tense silence. Diners at other tables were pretending to eat, but everyone was watching the corner booth. Magnus Sterling sat like a king on a throne. He was a man in his late 30s, with sharp, predatory features, steel-grey eyes, and a suit that cost more than Helen's entire life's earnings. He was currently shouting at his assistant in a rapid-fire dialect that sounded harsh and guttural. Helen walked slowly. Her heart should have been pounding, but strangely, a calm settled over her. She knew that voice. She knew the cadence of that anger. As she approached the table, Magnus slammed his hand down on the white tablecloth. Diese verdammten Idioten! Niemand hier versteht den Unterschied zwischen einem Jahrgang 82 und Essig. These damn idiots. No one here understands the difference between a vintage 82 and vinegar. He was speaking a specific dialect of Swiss German, distinct to the Zurich Highlands, mixed with high society frustration. His assistant, a young man named Peter, looked ready to cry. Sir, please, in English. They don't understand. I don't want to speak English. Magnus switched to impeccable, but heavily accented English. I want service. I want a server who has a brain, not these models who look at me like I am speaking Martian. Helen reached the table. She didn't tremble. She didn't flinch. She set the water pitcher down on a side tray with practiced grace, a grace she had supposedly never learned. Magnus didn't even look up. He waved a hand dismissively at her. Go away. Send me the manager again. I want to buy this place just so I can fire everyone personally. Helen picked up the water glass. It was empty. She poured. The stream was steady, stopping exactly 3 millimeters from the rim, the precise European standard for fine dining, something even the trained staff often missed. Magnus noticed the precision. He stopped talking. He looked up, his grey eyes locking onto her thick glasses and frayed apron. What is this? He sneered. They send me the cleaner now. Is this a joke? He turned to his bodyguards. Get her out of here. I am losing my appetite. Helen finished pouring. She set the pitcher down. She should have run. She should have apologized and fled back to the safety of the dish pit. That's what the mouse would do. But Helen was tired. She was tired of Derek's abuse. She was tired of hiding, and hearing that specific dialect, the language of her childhood summers, triggered something in her blood. She looked Magnus Sterling dead in the eye. The silence at table 1 was absolute. The bodyguards, massive men who looked like they chewed gravel for breakfast, started to rise from their seats. Derek, watching from the kitchen doorway, covered his eyes. Oh God, she's going to get killed. I'm going to get sued. Magnus stared at the waitress. He expected fear. He expected tears. Instead, he saw a strange defiance behind those cheap plastic frames. Did you hear me? Magnus growled. I said, get out. Helen clasped her hands behind her back. Her posture shifted. The slump of the exhausted dishwasher vanished. Her spine straightened, her chin lifted. When she spoke, her voice wasn't the raspy whisper she used in the kitchen. It was clear, melodic, and commanding. And she didn't speak English. Der eidernachigsige Petrus braucht mindestens eine Stunde zum Atmen, Herr Sterling. Wenn man ihn sofort einschenkt, schmeckt er tatsächlich wie Essig. Das ist nicht die Schuld des Kellners, das ist ihre Ungeduld. Der 63 Petrus needs at least an hour to breathe, Mr. Sterling. If you pour it immediately, it does indeed taste like vinegar. That is not the waiter's fault. That is your impatience. The sound of the Swiss dialect rolling perfectly off her tongue hit Magnus like a physical blow. His mouth opened slightly. The fork in his hand hovered in mid-air. Peter, the assistant, dropped his tablet. Magnus blinked. The anger drained from his face, replaced by pure confusion. He narrowed his eyes, studying her as if she were a ghost. "Wie bitte?" "Excuse me," he whispered. Helen didn't back down. She continued, switching seamlessly to French, but not just any French. It was the aristocratic Parisian French taught in the finest boarding schools. Furthermore, if you are looking for the Dover soul, I would advise against it tonight. The shipment was delayed at JFK. The turbot, however, arrived from Brittany this morning. It would pair significantly better with the acidity of your mood. Magnus sat back in his chair. A slow, disbelief-filled smile crept onto his face. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator finding a new toy. "Who are you?" he asked in English, his voice low. "I am the cleaner," Helen replied in English, keeping her tone flat. "As you pointed out." She picked up the empty wine bottle, the Chateau Petrus that cost $5,000, and inspected the label. "And you are Magnus Sterling, the man trying to hostile take over the Harrington estate. Though if you handle negotiations the way you handle wine, I imagine the Harringtons have nothing to worry about." The entire restaurant had gone quiet. Derek, by the kitchen door, was hyperventilating. He was already mentally drafting his resignation letter. No one spoke to Magnus Sterling like that. No one. Magnus stared at her for a long, agonizing 10 seconds. Then he threw his head back and laughed. It was a booming, genuine laugh that startled the other diners. "Sit," Magnus commanded, kicking out the empty chair next to him. "I am on the clock, sir," Helen said stiffly. "I will buy the clock. I will buy the building. Sit down," Magnus barked, though there was no malice in it now, only intense curiosity. He snapped his fingers at his assistant. "Peter, give her your chair. Go stand over there." Peter scrambled up, terrifyingly obedient, and offered the chair to Helen. Helen hesitated. She looked back at the kitchen. She could see Derek making cut-it-out gestures, practically vibrating with rage. But she looked back at Magnus. This was dangerous. If he recognized her face, if he knew who she really was, everything she had built over the last 3 years would be destroyed. But she also knew men like Magnus. If she showed weakness now, he would crush her. If she played the game, she might survive. She sat down. A cleaner who speaks Zurich High German and Parisian French, Magnus leaned in, his elbows on the table. "And who knows the logistics of my fish delivery?" "What is your name?" "Helen," she lied. "Just Helen." "Just Helen," Magnus repeated, testing the name. He poured a glass of the wine, the one she had criticized, and pushed it toward her. "Drink. Tell me if I am truly impatient, or if this bottle was corked." It was a test, a trap. Helen took the crystal glass. She didn't gulp it. She swirled the dark red liquid, watching the legs of the wine drip down the side. She brought it to her nose, inhaling deeply. "Black currant, truffle and wet earth," she murmured. She took a small sip. She let it sit on her tongue before swallowing. She set the glass down. "It's not corked," she said. "But it was stored improperly. Probably near a heat source in the cellar. The structure is collapsing. You were right to be angry." But you were angry at the wrong people. You should be angry at the sommelier, not the girl who poured the water. Magnus stared at her. Incredible. He turned to his head bodyguard. Check the sommelier. See if the cellar temperature logs were altered. The bodyguard nodded and walked off toward the back office. Magnus turned back to Helen. His eyes were gleaming. You are not a waitress, Helen, and you are certainly not a cleaner. You have the palate of a diplomat and the tongue of a viper. Who are you, really? Before Helen could answer, before she could construct another lie, a shadow fell over the table. It was Derek. He had finally mustered the courage to approach, his face red with fury. Mr. Sterling, I am so sorry, Derek sputtered, reaching out to grab Helen's shoulder. This employee is mentally unstable. She is being terminated immediately. Get up, you stupid girl. Get out of this chair right now before I call the police. Helen flinched. The mask of the confident aristocrat slipped, revealing the terrified employee beneath. Magnus didn't even look at Derek. He just reached out, grabbed Derek's wrist with a grip like iron, and twisted. Derek yelped, dropping to his knees. Don't touch her, Magnus said calmly, his voice dropping an octave. And don't interrupt us. She is the first intelligent conversation I have had in this city. If you speak to her again, I will buy this restaurant and turn it into a parking lot. Do you understand? Derek nodded frantically, tears in his eyes. Yes, sir. Good. Now go away. Bring us the turbot, and bring a fresh bottle of the 82 from the back of the cellar. Derek scrambled away, looking at Helen with a mixture of hatred and terror. Magnus turned back to Helen. The playfulness was gone from his face. He looked at her with a terrifying intensity. Now, Magnus said softly, let us stop the games. You speak the dialect of the Oberland. My grandmother spoke that. There are only about 3 families in New York who would teach their children that specific accent. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. One of those families is the Harringtons, the family I am here to destroy. Helen's blood ran cold. Tell me, just Helen, Magnus whispered. Why do you look exactly like the photograph of Victoria Harrington, the heiress who died in a boating accident 3 years ago? The name Victoria Harrington hung in the air like smoke. Helen's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. For 3 years she had buried that name. She had buried it under layers of grease, oversized uniforms, and silence. She had become Mouse to survive, because Victoria Harrington was a woman marked for death. If Magnus Sterling knew who she was, he was a danger. The Harringtons, specifically her uncle, Conrad Harrington, and her step-cousin, Isabella, had orchestrated the accident that supposedly killed her. If they found out she was alive, they wouldn't miss a second time. Helen forced a laugh. It was brittle, but it was enough to break the tension. You have an active imagination, Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice steadying. Victoria Harrington was a socialite who spent her time buying horses and attending galas. Do I look like a socialite? She gestured to her stained apron, her cracked fingernails, and the cheap plastic glasses taped at the hinge. Magnus didn't blink. He studied her hands. You have calluses, yes, but you hold your silverware with the pinky tucked. You sit with your spine not touching the back of the chair. And you recognized a dialect that hasn't been spoken commonly in Zurich since the 1990s. You can lie with your mouth, Helen, but your breeding betrays you. He took a sip of his wine, his eyes never leaving hers. But fine. Let us pretend you are just Helen the waitress. Let us test your mind, not your history. Magnus cleared the space on the table, pushing aside the silver salt shakers. I am bored, Helen. My dinner date, the CEO of Nexus Corp, cancelled on me because he is afraid of me. So entertain me. You clearly have a brain. Do you play chess? Helen hesitated. Chess had been her sanctuary. Before the accident, before she lost everything, she had been a grandmaster prospect. It was the one thing her father had loved about her before he died. I know how the pieces move, she said carefully. Good. But we have no board, Magnus smirked, so we will play blindfold chess. Mental only. Standard algebraic notation. Unless that is too difficult for a waitress. It was a challenge, a direct insult to her intelligence, the old Victoria, the fiery girl who refused to let men talk down to her, flared to life in her chest. White or black? Helen asked, her voice cooling by 10 degrees. Magnus's eyebrows shot up. I'll take white, e4. Helen didn't hesitate. c5, the Sicilian defense. Aggressive? Magnus chuckled. nf3, d6. The restaurant around them ceased to exist. The clatter of dishes, the jazz music, the terrified looks from Derek and the other waiters. It all faded into background noise. There was only the mental board suspended in the air between the billionaire and the waitress. Magnus was good. He played with a ruthless, attacking style, sacrificing pawns to open up lines of attack, mirroring his business strategy. He tried to bully her, to force her into a corner. But Helen was better. She played the Najdorf variation, a complex, double-edged system that required absolute precision. She countered his aggression with cold, calculating defense, setting traps that were invisible until it was too late. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The food, the turbot that had finally arrived, went cold on the plates. Magnus was sweating. He loosened his tie. He was staring at the tablecloth as if the pieces were physically there, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. He had lost track of the position twice, but Helen had corrected him instantly, remembering every single move of the 35-turn sequence without pausing. Queen to h5, Magnus announced triumphantly. Check. You have nowhere to go, Helen. Mate in 2. Helen took a sip of water. She adjusted her glasses. Actually, Mr. Sterling, she said softly, you forgot my bishop on b7. Bishop takes h1, the rook falls, and your queen is trapped. Magnus froze. He replayed the mental board in his head. His eyes widened. Knight to f4, he muttered. g5, Helen countered instantly. Bishop 2. No, no. Magnus slammed his fist on the table, making the cutlery jump. Verdammt! He looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was awe. You trapped my queen 6 moves ago, he whispered. You baited me with the knight sacrifice. You're too aggressive, Helen said, finally picking up her fork to eat a bite of the cold fish. You attack without securing your supply lines. In chess, that loses you a queen. In business, that loses you a merger. Magnus sat back, breathing heavily. He looked like a man who had just run a marathon. Who taught you? He demanded. My father, Helen said, a sad smile touching her lips. He told me that men like to think they are kings, but on the board, the queen is the most powerful piece. The king is just a liability to be protected. Magnus stared at her. The air between them crackled with an electric tension that had nothing to do with chess. For a moment, the barrier of class, the billions of dollars separating them, vanished. They were just two intellects, recognizing each other in the dark. I have a proposition for you, Helen, Magnus said, his voice low and serious. I'm not interested in being a mistress, Helen said bluntly. I don't want a mistress. I can buy a mistress on any street corner in Manhattan, Magnus scoffed. I need a brain. I need a strategist. I am acquiring Harrington Logistics next week. The board of directors is stonewalling me. They are using obscure bylaws and emotional manipulation to keep me out. I need someone who understands their world, who understands their language. He leaned in. "I will pay you $10,000 a night, just to sit in meetings and translate, not the words, the lies." $10,000. That was more than Helen made in 6 months. It could get her out of the roach-infested apartment. It could buy her a fake passport. It could buy her freedom. But it would mean walking straight into the lion's den, into the boardroom where her Uncle Conrad sat. "I can't," Helen said, standing up abruptly. Her heart was racing. "I have to get back to work. Derek is watching." "Helen, wait!" Magnus reached for her hand. "Please," she pulled away. "Thank you for the wine, Mr. Sterling, but leave me alone." She turned and fled toward the kitchen, leaving the billionaire stunned and alone at the best table in the house. The kitchen was a war zone, and Helen was the enemy. As soon as the double doors swung shut behind her, the silence of the dining room was replaced by the chaotic noise of the line. But the noise stopped the moment she walked in. Derek was waiting. He stood by the dish pit, his face purple with rage. Beside him was Chloe, smirking with malicious glee. "You," Derek spat the word like a curse. "You think you're special? You think because you fluttered your eyelashes at a rich man and spoke some gibberish, you're better than us?" "I didn't flutter anything," Helen said, her adrenaline crashing, leaving her exhausted. "He asked me a question. I answered." "You sat at a table," Derek screamed. "You ate the guests' food. Do you know what that does to the reputation of the Obsidian? We are a Michelin star establishment, not a dating service for dishwashers." "He invited me, Derek. You saw him." "I don't care." Derek grabbed her arm, digging his fingernails in. "You embarrassed me. You made me look incompetent, and nobody makes Derek Vance look incompetent." He shoved her. Helen stumbled back, hitting her hip against the stainless steel counter. A stack of plates wobbled and crashed to the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces. "Look what you did!" Chloe shrieked, delighted. "That's $200 in China." "Get out!" Derek hissed. "You're fired. Get your things and get out, and don't expect your last paycheck. That will cover the broken plates." "You can't do that," Helen said, her voice trembling. "I worked 60 hours this week. That's illegal." "Who are they going to believe?" Derek sneered, stepping closer, looming over her. "Me, the manager? Or the homeless girl with no references and a fake social security number?" "Yes, I know it's fake, Helen. I checked." Helen went cold. If he called the police about the fake ID, they would fingerprint her. And if they fingerprinted her, the system would flag her as Victoria Harrington, or worse, her uncle would be alerted. She had no choice. "Fine," she whispered. She untied her apron and let it drop to the floor amidst the broken porcelain. "I'm leaving. And take your trash with you." Derek kicked her backpack toward her. Helen grabbed her bag and ran out the back exit, into the alleyway. It was pouring rain. A cold, miserable New York downpour that soaked her to the bone in seconds. The alley stank of garbage and old grease. Helen leaned against the brick wall, sliding down until she was crouching in the mud. She buried her face in her hands. She was fired. She had no money. Her rent was due in 2 days, and she had just rejected the only man who could have helped her. She let out a sob, the sound lost in the thunder. She was so tired of fighting. Maybe she should just let her uncle find her. Maybe she should just give up. Suddenly, the rain stopped falling on her. Helen looked up. She wasn't wet anymore, but the rain was still coming down in sheets around her. A large black umbrella was held over her head. She followed the arm holding the umbrella up to the face of the man standing above her. It was Peter, Magnus Sterling's assistant. "Mr. Sterling hates to see talent wasted," Peter said, his voice mild. "And he hates to see women crying in alleyways even more." Helen scrambled to her feet, wiping the mud from her jeans. I'm fine." "You are not fine," a deep voice came from behind Peter. A sleek, black Rolls-Royce Phantom was parked at the mouth of the alley, its engine purring silently. The rear window rolled down, revealing Magnus Sterling. He wasn't looking at her with pity. He was looking at her with anger. "Get in," Magnus commanded. "I can't," Helen shivered. "I'm wet. I'm dirty. I have spent $5,000 detailing that car, and I will spend another $5,000 tomorrow. Get inside before you catch pneumonia. I do not negotiate with sick people." Helen looked at the back door of the restaurant. Derek was probably watching from the window, laughing. Then she looked at the warm, leather interior of the car. She opened the door and slid in. The warmth hit her instantly. The car smelled of expensive cologne and heated leather. Magnus pressed a button, and the partition between them and the driver slid up, sealing them in privacy. He handed her a thick cashmere towel. "Dry yourself," he said, turning his gaze to the window to give her privacy. Helen dried her hair and face. She took off her glasses, wiping the fog from them. Without the glasses, and with her hair wet and slicked back, her bone structure was undeniable. High cheekbones, a sharp jawline, the face of an aristocrat. Magnus turned back. He paused, his eyes tracing her features. "You really are her," he murmured. "Victoria." Helen stiffened. "I told you." "Stop." Magnus held up a hand. "I did a background check on Helen Miller while you were playing chess. It is a very good forgery, but there are gaps. No tax records before 2022. No high school diploma. And yet, you play chess at a grandmaster level and speak 4 languages. He opened a leather folder on his lap. "I don't care who you were," Magnus said. "I care about who you are right now. You are broke. You are homeless, or close to it. And you have enemies." He pulled out a document. It was a contract. "I'm going to war, Helen. The Harringtons are not just bad businessmen. They are criminals. Conrad Harrington has been laundering money through the logistics shipping routes for 5 years. That is why he won't sell to me. He is afraid I will find the books." Helen's breath caught. She knew Conrad was evil, but she didn't know about the laundering. That was why he had tried to kill her. She had stumbled upon those files 3 years ago, just before the boat exploded. "If I take over the company," Magnus continued, his voice hard, "I will expose him. I will crush him. He will go to prison for the rest of his life." He looked at her intensely. "But I cannot do it alone. The board sees me as a foreign barbarian. They won't talk to me. I need a bridge. I need a fiancé." "A what?" Helen choked out. "A fake fiancé," Magnus corrected. "Someone with class, elegance, and intelligence who can charm the board members, distract Conrad, and signal to the world that Magnus Sterling is settling down, becoming Americanized. You will accompany me to the gala on Saturday. You will attend the board meeting on Monday. You will play the role of the woman who tamed the beast." "And in return?" Helen asked, her voice barely a whisper. "In return," Magnus said, "I will give you a new identity. A real one, with a trust fund of $5 million. You can go anywhere in the world. You can be anyone you want." He extended a pen. "Help me destroy the Harringtons, Helen. Help me get your revenge, and I will give you your life back." Helen looked at the pen. It was a Mont Blanc, heavy and black. She looked out the window. She saw Derek coming out of the back door of the restaurant, holding a trash bag. He looked small and pathetic from inside the Rolls-Royce. She thought of her Uncle Conrad, the man who had cut the brake line on her car, the man who had rigged the boat, the man who was living in her father's house, drinking her father's wine. She took the pen. "I have conditions," she said, her voice strong. Magnus smiled. It was a wolfish smile, but there was respect in it. "I would expect nothing less. Name them." "1," Helen said. "I choose my own wardrobe. I will not look like a doll. 2, you never ask me about the last 3 years again. And 3, she uncapped the pen. "If we take Conrad down, I want to be the one to deliver the checkmate." Magnus's eyes blazed with triumph. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter, built into the car door. "Deal," he said. Helen signed the paper. The ink was dark and permanent. "To the destruction of the Harringtons," Magnus toasted, clinking his glass against hers. "To the end game," Helen replied. As the Rolls-Royce pulled away from the curb, gliding into the rainy New York night, Helen didn't look back at the restaurant. The mouse was dead. The Queen was back on the board. But neither of them knew that the game was rigged. Conrad Harrington wasn't just laundering money. He was working with the Russian mob. And by the time the car turned the corner, a photographer hidden in a van across the street had already snapped a picture of Magnus Sterling, and the woman who looked exactly like the dead Victoria Harrington. The photo was already uploading to Conrad's private server. The next 48 hours were a blur of logistics and luxury that would have made the old Victoria Harrington dizzy. But Helen, the woman who had scrubbed floors for 3 years, saw things differently now. She didn't see the penthouse suite at the Pierre Hotel as a playground. She saw it as a fortress. She stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the dressing room Magnus had set up for her. A team of stylists hovered nervously behind her, holding racks of gowns worth more than a small house. "Mr. Sterling suggested the red Versace," the lead stylist said, holding up a dress that was little more than strips of silk and danger. "He said it signals aggression." Helen adjusted her glasses, fake ones now, with non-prescription lenses, because Magnus insisted they were part of her intellectual disguise. She looked at the red dress. "No," Helen said. Her voice was calm but absolute. "That dress says I am trying to distract them. I don't want to distract the board of directors. I want to dismantle them." She walked to the rack and pulled out a midnight blue velvet gown. It was severe, with long sleeves and a high neck, but the back plunged dangerously low. It was elegant, regal, and intimidating. "This one," Helen said, "and pull my hair back. Tight. No loose strands. I am not a debutante. I am a weapon." The door opened. Magnus leaned against the frame, holding 2 espressos. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like armor. He watched her command the room, a smirk playing on his lips. "You are terrifying," he said approvingly, as the stylists scurried away to prep the shoes. "I learned from the worst." Helen took the espresso. "My Uncle Conrad used to say that if you walk into a room smiling, you've already negotiated your price down." Magnus's expression darkened at the mention of Conrad. He walked over to the window, looking out over Central Park. "My security team swept the venue for tonight's gala," Magnus said quietly. "The Metropolitan Museum of Art. It's neutral ground. But Conrad has increased his detail. He has 6 men. 2 are ex-Spetsnaz." "He's scared," Helen said, joining him at the window. "He knows you're coming for the company. He just doesn't know how." "He knows something," Magnus admitted. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "This arrived at my office an hour ago. No return address." He handed it to her. It was a printout of a grainy photo taken from a distance. It showed Helen getting into the Rolls-Royce in the rain. Her face was blurry, but the profile was distinct. Scrawled across the bottom in red ink were the words, "Nice pet. Does she bite?" Helen's hand trembled slightly, but she crushed the paper in her fist. "He doesn't know it's me," she reasoned, her mind racing. "If he knew it was Victoria Harrington, the note wouldn't say pet. It would say ghost. He thinks I'm just a mistress you picked up to make him jealous." "Or he thinks you are a spy," Magnus countered. "Either way, you are a target tonight. Are you sure you want to do this? We can cancel. I can find another way to crush him." Helen looked at the man beside her. For a billionaire known as the Wolf of Wall Street, he was looking at her with genuine concern. In just 2 days, their late-night strategy sessions, arguing over spreadsheets, debating corporate bylaws and replaying chess games, had forged a bond deeper than romance. They were partners in war. "I ran for 3 years, Magnus," Helen said softly. "I'm done running. Tonight we walk through the front door." Magnus stared at her for a long moment. Then he took her hand and kissed the knuckles. "Then let us go," he said. "And remember the back story." "I am Helen Miller," she recited perfectly. "Consultant for Artificer Global. We met in Zurich at a chaotic economic forum. I corrected your German, you insulted my taste in opera, and we've been inseparable since." "Perfect," Magnus grinned. "Check." The Temple of Dendor inside the Metropolitan Museum was bathed in golden light. The air hummed with the sound of a string quartet and the clinking of champagne flutes. This was the annual Harrington Foundation Gala, the center of New York's social calendar. When Magnus Sterling entered the room, the conversation didn't just stop. It died. He walked in with the confidence of a man who owned the air everyone else was breathing, but it was the woman on his arm who drew the stares. Helen moved with a fluid, liquid grace. The midnight blue velvet swallowed the light, making her skin look like alabaster. She wore no jewelry except for a simple diamond choker, a gift from Magnus that morning. She didn't look at the cameras flashing wildly at the entrance. She looked straight ahead, her face a mask of cool boredom. "Don't look left," Magnus whispered, his lips barely moving. "Isabella is at the bar. She looks like she swallowed a lemon." Helen glanced peripherally. Isabella, her step-cousin, was wearing a gaudy pink sequined dress that cost more than Helen's entire education. Isabella had been the one who tormented Helen growing up, the one who called her Orphan Annie after Helen's parents died. "She looks tacky," Helen whispered back. "Focus. The board is at the center table. The grey-haired man is Arthur Pendleton. He's the swing vote." They moved through the crowd. Helen felt the eyes on her. She heard the whispers. "Who is she? Is that Sterling's new fling? She looks familiar." They reached the center table. Arthur Pendleton, an elderly man with a monocle of old-world skepticism, looked up. "Mr. Sterling," Arthur said coldly, "we didn't expect to see you. This is a private charity event." "I am feeling charitable, Arthur," Magnus smiled, pulling out a chair for Helen. "I would like to introduce my associate and fiancée, Ms. Helen Miller." Arthur's eyes narrowed as he looked at Helen. "Fiancée? I didn't know you had a heart to give away, Magnus. And Ms. Miller? I don't recall the name." "I prefer to keep a low profile, Mr. Pendleton," Helen said, her voice dropping into that smooth, aristocratic register she had perfected. "But Magnus speaks so highly of your collection of 17th-century naval maps. I felt I had to meet the man who outbid the British Museum for the Drake manuscript." Arthur froze. His eyes widened. The Drake manuscript was his secret pride and joy, a detail known only to a handful of expert collectors. You know the Drake?" Arthur stammered. "I wrote my thesis on navigational errors in the West Indies," Helen lied effortlessly, channeling facts she had memorized from Magnus's dossiers. "I've always argued that Drake's third voyage was a cover for espionage, but without seeing the original manuscript, it's just theory. I envy you." Arthur beamed. "The ice didn't just break, it shattered. My dear, you must come see it. Finally, someone who understands cartography. Magnus, where have you been hiding her?" For the next 20 minutes, Helen worked the table like a surgeon. She spoke French to the investor from Lyon, discussing the nuances of vineyard soil. She debated the ethics of AI logistics with the tech director. She charmed, she listened, and she gently steered every conversation toward one conclusion. Harrington Logistics is failing, and Magnus Sterling is the visionary who can save it. Magnus watched her, sipping his drink, barely needing to speak. She was winning the war for him without firing a shot. Then, the atmosphere shifted. The crowd parted near the stage, The music seemed to get discordant. Conrad Harrington approached. He was a bear of a man, with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his dead, shark-like eyes. He walked with a heavy cane, not because he needed it, but because it looked like a weapon. Flanking him were two men who didn't look like guests, bulky suits, earpieces, scars. The Spetsnaz. "Magnus," Conrad's voice boomed. "You have some nerve showing your face here, and you brought a date." Conrad turned his gaze to Helen. Helen felt her blood freeze. This was the man who had ordered her death. This was the man who had laughed at her father's funeral. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "Do not blink. Do not look away. You are Helen Miller." "Conrad." Magnus stepped slightly in front of Helen. "This is Helen." Conrad ignored Magnus. He stepped closer to Helen, invading her personal space. He smelled of cigars and expensive scotch. He squinted, his eyes scanning her face, looking for the ghost of his niece. "Helen," Conrad repeated. "You have a very specific bone structure, my dear. Has anyone ever told you that you look like a tragedy?" "I have been told I look like my mother," Helen said, her voice steady. "She was a school teacher in Ohio." "Ohio," Conrad chuckled darkly. "How quaint. And yet you wear that gown like you were born in it. And you charmed Arthur, who hates everyone." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper intended only for her and Magnus. "My security team ran facial recognition on the guest list, Miss Miller. The system threw an error on you. It said you are a statistical anomaly, a 99.9% match for a dead girl." Magnus tensed, his hand curling into a fist. "Conrad, back off." "But that's impossible," Conrad continued, his eyes gleaming with cruelty. "Because I saw the body. It was burned, of course. Dental records were difficult. But I was so sure." He tapped his cane on the marble floor. "If you are who I think you might be," Conrad whispered, "then you are incredibly stupid to come back. Because dead people have no rights. Dead people have no inheritance. And if a dead person suddenly reappears, well, that looks like fraud, doesn't it? Faking one's death to avoid debts. The police would arrest you before you could utter a single accusation. It was a trap, a brilliant, legal trap. If she revealed herself as Victoria, he would spin it that she faked her death to escape her father's crumbling finances, discrediting her instantly. Helen felt the walls closing in. He had checkmated her before the game even started. "I don't know what you are talking about," Helen said, but her voice lacked its earlier power. "Good." Conrad straightened up, his public smile returning. "Then let's have a toast to the future of Harrington Logistics, which I assure you will never belong to a foreigner." He snapped his fingers. A waiter appeared with a tray of drinks. "To guests." Conrad raised a glass. Suddenly, Isabella appeared at Conrad's elbow. She was drunk, her face flushed with jealousy as she looked at Helen's dress, then at Magnus. "Oh, stop it, Daddy," Isabella slurred. "Just ask her. Ask her to play the piano." Conrad paused. "What?" "The piano," Isabella pointed to the grand Steinway on the stage. "Cousin Victoria was a prodigy. She could play Rachmaninoff blindfolded. If this nobody is really her, make her play. If she can't play, then she's just a fraud. If she can play, well, then we know." The room went silent. It was a challenge. Helen's hands began to sweat. She was a prodigy. It was the one thing she hadn't been able to hide in the orphanage, tapping her fingers on tabletops. But if she played like Victoria, she exposed herself. If she refused, she looked weak in front of the board she had just charmed. "A performance," Arthur Pendleton clapped. "Splendid idea. Miss Miller, please." Magnus looked at Helen. He saw the panic in her eyes. He stepped forward. "She is not a circus animal, Isabella. We are leaving." "No," Helen said. She stepped out from behind Magnus. If she left now, they lost the board. They lost the company. And Conrad won. She had to play, but she had to play differently. She had to play in a way Victoria never would have. "I would be delighted," Helen said. She walked up the stairs to the stage. The spotlight hit her. She sat at the piano. The keys gleamed like teeth. Victoria Harrington had played classical, Mozart, Bach, Rachmaninoff. Precise, rigid, perfect. Helen closed her eyes. She thought of the last 3 years, the noise of the kitchen, the jazz records playing in the back alley, the chaotic, improvisational rhythm of survival. She didn't play Rachmaninoff. She hit a low, dissonant chord, a jazz chord. She launched into a dark, smoky, complex improvisation of Thelonious Monk. It was erratic, soulful, jagged, and angry. It was the music of the streets, not the conservatory. It was brilliant, but it was not Victoria Harrington. The crowd was mesmerized. It was raw emotion poured into sound. Conrad watched, his brow furrowed. Victoria hated jazz. She called it messy. Helen finished with a crashing, defiant chord that echoed through the hall. The room erupted in applause. Helen stood up, bowing slightly. She looked at Conrad. His face was a mask of confusion. She had passed the test. She walked back to Magnus, who looked at her with burning admiration. "I didn't know you played jazz," he whispered. "I didn't," she breathed, "until I had to." Conrad stepped into their path again. He looked shaken, but he wasn't done. "You play well," Conrad snarled. "For a fake, but games are over." He pulled out his phone. "I didn't want to do this here," Conrad said, his voice hard. "But you leave me no choice. Magnus, you should check your email and look at the news." Magnus frowned. He pulled out his phone. His face went pale. "What is it?" Helen asked. Magnus turned the screen to her. A breaking news alert from the New York Tribune. Breaking. Magnus Sterling, accused of insider trading and embezzlement. Evidence leaked from anonymous source. "The DOJ just issued a warrant," Conrad smiled, a cruel, triumphant grin. "The police are waiting outside, Magnus. You aren't buying my company. You are going to prison." Conrad looked at Helen. "And you, Miss Miller. You're an accomplice. Unless—" He leaned in close to her ear. "Unless you testify against him. If you sign a statement saying Magnus masterminded the fraud, I'll let you walk away. I'll even give you that $5 million he promised." Conrad pulled back, checking his watch. "The police will be in the room in 30 seconds. Decide, Helen. Be the hero who exposed the corrupt Tycoon, or go to jail with him as his whore." Helen looked at Magnus. He was staring at his phone, frantically typing to his lawyers. He looked up at her, realizing the trap. He knew he was innocent, but the frame-up was perfect. He looked at Helen. "Go," he said. "Get away from me. Don't let them take you too." Helen looked at the exit. She looked at Conrad, who was holding a pen out to her, smiling the smile of the devil. The doors of the gala burst open. Uniformed officers marched in. The police officers pushed through the crowd, heading straight for Magnus. The handcuffs were already out. Helen looked at the pen in Conrad's hand. It was the easy way out. It was safety. It was $5 million. She took the pen. Conrad's smile widened. He had won. The mouse had returned to her hole. But Helen didn't sign the paper. Instead, she jammed the sharp point of the pen into the microphone stand on the podium, creating a screech of feedback that silenced the entire room. She stepped up to the mic. "Officer," Helen's voice rang out, amplified and commanding. "Before you arrest Mr. Sterling, you should check the metadata of the evidence you were sent." "Step away from the mic, Mum," the lead officer barked. "No," Helen said. She turned to the board of directors. She took off her glasses and threw them on the floor, shattering them. She pulled the pins from her hair, letting it cascade down her back in waves. "I am not Helen Miller," she announced, her voice shaking with adrenaline, but clear as a bell. My name is Victoria Harrington, and I am the majority shareholder of this company." A gasp ripped through the room. Arthur Pendleton dropped his glass. Conrad's face went from smug to ghostly white. "She's lying!" Conrad screamed, lunging forward. "She's a fraud. Arrest her, too." "I am not lying," Victoria continued, locking eyes with her uncle. "3 years ago, someone cut the brake lines on my car and rigged my boat to explode. I survived, and I went into hiding because I knew the police were on his payroll." She pointed a trembling finger at Conrad. "But I didn't just hide. I watched. And tonight, while you were all listening to me play jazz, Mr. Sterling's team was decrypting the files I gave Arthur Pendleton." Arthur stood up, holding the USB drive Helen had slipped him earlier. "She gave me this. I thought it was the digital scan of the Drake manuscript. It's a ledger of offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. It shows that the embezzlement framed on Magnus Sterling was actually a transfer authorized by Conrad Harrington." The police officer paused. He touched his earpiece. A voice on the other end, the FBI Cybercrimes Unit, was confirming the data in real time. "Conrad Harrington," the officer turned, unholstering his handcuffs. "Put your hands behind your back." "No, you can't," Conrad shouted, backing away, knocking over a tray of champagne. "I am the CEO. She's dead. She's a ghost." "I'm very much alive, Uncle," Victoria said coldly. "And I'm firing you." Conrad tried to run, but the Spetsnaz guards he had hired stepped aside, letting the police tackle him. As they dragged him away, screaming curses, the room erupted into chaos. Victoria stood on the stage, breathing hard. She felt a hand on her waist. Magnus was there. He wasn't looking at the police. He was looking at her. "You risked everything," Magnus whispered. "You could have taken the money." "I told you," Victoria smiled, tears finally spilling from her eyes. "The Queen is the most powerful piece on the board. She protects her king." Magnus kissed her, right there in front of the flashing cameras and the stunned board of directors. It wasn't a show for the press. It was the seal of a new partnership. The next day, the headlines didn't call her the Mouse. They called her the Lioness of Wall Street. Victoria took her rightful place as CEO, with Magnus by her side as the new chairman. They rebuilt the company, not with fear, but with the brilliance they shared. And the Obsidian restaurant? Magnus bought it. He fired Derek personally, and turned the building into a homeless shelter and culinary school for women who, like Helen, just needed a second chance to show the world who they really were. And that is the story of how an underestimated waitress took down a corrupt tycoon and found love in the middle of a corporate war. It just goes to show that you should never judge someone by their uniform. You never know if the person pouring your water is secretly a grandmaster waiting for their moment to say, "Checkmate." If you enjoyed this story of twists, hidden identities, and sweet karmic justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. What did you think of Victoria's decision at the end? Would you have taken the $5 million? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.